Anywhere else for that matter. The government bill not only orders them back to work, but also imposes a wage settlement, and it gives both sides 3 months to negotiate a deal on other issues. Mark Miller's live in Ottawa tonight with the latest word on when or if we can expect mail service again. Mark, is the union making noises about defying this order?
Well, the union is trying to decide what their next move is going to be. They met tonight. They will meet again tomorrow. They held a news conference about 3 hours ago to tell reporters what their position was. They said they were outraged, they were angry, but they said they had not yet made up their mind as to whether or not they are going to oppose this legislation and remain on strike. Protests that started on the East Coast quickly spread to BC. Postal workers occupied federal offices. MPs Raymond Chan and Hedy Fry were both targets of angry postal workers.
We're having a 3-year contract, a 3-year collective agreement imposed upon us by our government. We're having wages imposed upon us by our government. We don't feel that this is fair at all, Mr. Chan. Not at all.
In the House of Commons, the bill that is expected to force the strikers back to work was finally introduced this afternoon. It had been blocked temporarily once this morning. In the secretive document made public only after its tabling, the government has gone to the extreme measure of imposing a settlement on wages. Strikers will have to take it. The raise will be slightly less than what Canada Post had made in its final offer. It will be significantly less than what the union had demanded.
It's an insult that we at the bargaining table had agreed to better wages and at an earlier time, and that this government is just attacking workers.
Other issues will be settled by an arbitrator, but if strikers are thinking of ignoring the back-to-work legislation, they better think twice. The bill is calling for hefty fines, $1,000 a day for any striker who refuses to go back, $100,000 a day for the union.
What we want is this legislation to get through the House of Commons and get the Postal Service back in operation. I think you'll see that very shortly.
The union is not admitting defeat yet. What they won't tell us, though, is whether they can afford those fines, whether they can keep the strike going and keep the mail stopped. Now, the government has given notice that they will debate this issue well into the wee hours of, I guess, not only tomorrow morning, but Thursday morning as well. They will not adjourn Parliament tomorrow until this thing is ready to be sent to the Senate. So that means we could see mail moving again as early as Thursday, perhaps Friday at the latest.
Okay, Mark, thank you.
Okay, Deb.
Well, one of the biggest issues in this dispute has been wages. There is another big problem. The post office and the union disagree on how the length of postal routes should be calculated. Canada Post supervisors have been out on Greater Vancouver streets since the strike began, measuring off routes, sidewalk by sidewalk. Canada Post used to measure off paces, but it's now using metered wheels to get more accurate route lengths. The differences are sometimes tiny, but stretched across the country, they could add up to a lot of jobs.
47.8.
On any given block, the way that Canada Post assess our workload, they break every function, every physical thing that we do down into its simplest terms. That includes paces, how far you have to travel down a walk. We know that's very easy to figure out.
Set up sort of a symbolic protest at the offices of MP Hedy Fry and Raymond Chan. Now behind me at the main post office, as you can see, are the picketers. And this may be the last few days that you see these guys on the picket line as the federal government has introduced back-to-work legislation.
I separated from my son for 22 years. This is the first Christmas together. Now I can't get the parcel out to him.
Dorothy Quinn is trying to send Christmas parcels to Alberta. However, the strike at Canada Post means she has to use a courier. At $35 a package, she can't afford that on her income of $900 a month. Her message to striking postal workers:
get back to work, you lazy bastards, and do the job you're supposed to be paid for.
An act to provide for the resumption and continuation of postal services.
In Ottawa today, the federal government government began the process of getting the mail moving again, they tabled back-to-work legislation which includes an imposed wage increase of just over 5% over 3 years.
I didn't just go out and pick a number. What we did was try to come up with a number that was fair.
Death to the Liberals!
Don't expect the pickets to come down anytime soon. At the earliest, you're looking at Thursday or Friday, and that's only if the legislation goes through without any major roadblocks from the opposition.
I think it's crap.
In Vancouver, some posties say they're willing to defy the back-to-work order.
In these two, we will. They don't bring back the people they laid off. They laid people off with 23 years seniority from the main post office here. We're all going in together or we're not.
Now, the posties thinking of defying the legislation, they can of course do that, but it's a very, very costly measure. It's the fines imposed are about $100,000 for the union, $50,000 for the union leaders, and $1,000 a day per members. So if the postal union is thinking about that, they better have a huge strike fund.
Should be an interesting week. Thanks, Oliver Lum, outside the Vancouver Postal Station.
Protests follow the union's call for civil disobedience as a response to the government's back-to-work legislation. As for the legislation itself, it was the subject of hot debate on Parliament Hill today. The Liberals say they still hope to force it through later this evening, and that means the mail could be moving by Friday.
200 postal workers marched through the streets of Ottawa. They whistled, they chanted, they held up traffic, and then marched to the steps of the Parliament buildings.
Today in this House, it's a sad day for the democracy in this country we live in. The workers, united!
But neither their words nor their actions could sway Prime Minister Chrétien and his government from proceeding with a bill to end the 2-week-old postal strike.
Can you tell us when we might get postal service, Mr. Prime Minister? Soon.
As early as Friday.
The time is appropriate to act.
The Labour Minister, who just days ago talked about letting the collective bargaining process work, now declared it hasn't and introduced back-to-work legislation.
We have acted to protect the interests of Canadians.
The back-to-work bill sets the posties' pay in a 3-year contract and provides for heavy fines for those who defy it.
We believe it's heavy-handed.
The NDP allowed the bill to go forward, but in return, the New Democrats insisted that a key clause be changed, a clause which the NDP says would turn the post office into a profit machine for the government.
But what this clearly has in mind is milking Canada Post like some cash cow for the government to use these excess revenues for purposes other than providing service to Canadians.
While the government is agreeing to back off on its bid to make Canada Post more profit-oriented, it won't budge on the posties' pay raise, 5.2% over 3 years.
I made the decision and it's there and it will be staying there.
The question now is, will the union leaders follow through on their threats to defy the legislation, or will they send their members back to work? Already there are some suggestions that the posties might vent their anger by allowing Canadians to mail for free.
Pleasure with the federal government to the streets in a noisy afternoon cavalcade. Their colleagues in Victoria forced a U.S. ferry company to back down on a cheap mail service between Vancouver Island and Seattle. And while the parade continued in Vancouver, postal workers in Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax disrupted airport operations. The mail is expected to be moving by Friday.
Here in Vancouver this afternoon, CUPW members staged a noisy 15-car cavalcade in hoping to attract public attention and sympathy. They circled the post office, then went through downtown to the West End, but despite all the noise, the public barely reacted. Meanwhile, on the picket line, workers are bitter about going back.
We sat down and worked it out today, and it's a 91-cent raise over 3 years. So by the end of the next contract, we might have paid off enough to have taken these 2 weeks off on strike. It's ridiculous.
We'll go back to work, but people are going to be bitter. That's all there is to it.
And another postal protest actually got some results in Victoria today. About a dozen postal workers set up pickets in front of Clipper Navigation. That's the company that runs the high-speed ferry from Victoria to Seattle. Postal workers are accusing the company of transporting mail into the United States at less than cost.
How long are you guys going to be here?
For as long as it takes. And if that means stopping the ferry from docking, that means stopping the ferry from docking. As far as we're concerned, that's our mail. It should not be going through the Victoria Clipper. This is a new service that they're offering, and new rates as of a couple days ago. So that's why we're here, to stop that mail.
Clipper employees, members of the Canadian Auto Workers Union, began honoring the picket lines. The ferry company has now agreed to increase its mail rates.
Canada's postal strike has paralyzed mail service for 10 days. And now that the federal government has passed back-to-work legislation, Canada Post says it's open for business tonight. This is a live shot of the main post office in downtown Vancouver. The pickets are still up because the legislation doesn't take effect until tomorrow. According to Canada Post, that's 7:30 a.m. But Canada Post is opening its doors to the 200 people who could be working the graveyard shift at midnight.
Well, we have finally got word that the legislation that has been passed, and effective 7:30 tomorrow morning, we are back in business, and we are opening our plant tonight for employees who would ordinarily work the graveyard shift to come into work if they wish.
Well, that's nice of them, but if the law doesn't come down until 7:30 in the morning, we'd be breaking the strike to walk in. So I can't see anything like that transpiring. I don't know.
Well, this is just provocation. The union picket line is in effect until noon tomorrow, and there's been no change in that time frame. And anybody who crosses the picket line before noon tomorrow will be scabbing.
If the Canadian Union of Postal Workers has its way, for the rest of this month, you'll be able to send letters with no postage. The union says the protest against the bill, which imposes a wage settlement, will take the form of allowing mail with insufficient postage through the system unchecked.
We will continue to process mail, and due to the heavy workload that we foresee upon our return, it is safe to say that we will not have time to check postage on the general public's mail. Besides, why shouldn't the general public get the same low rates as large volume mailers who are paying postage rates as low as 20 cents, especially during this holiday season?
The minister responsible for Canada Post says he doesn't believe Canadians will send mail with no postage.
I believe that Canadians have the sense of respect of the law, and the workers will respect the law, and I don't think that they would entertain those illegal acts.
Will posties be able to clear the 2-week backlog and get Christmas mail delivered on time?